My name is Saad Bayor.
My name is Ruth Hullett.
I'm Renee Newble.
I'm Nyla Bautista.
Courtney Glenn.
Tanaya Alvin.
So, the first question that we're talking about is what made you choose this studio, and how did you feel about it?
Okay, so I decided to choose this studio after reading an email that we received from the head of our department. The email basically entailed a description following what each section was going to discuss, and I think we only had between 2 or 3 sections to choose from. This was the first section in my experience to where we had to discuss and do a project that based on and around Black culture. So from there, I decided to choose this section, and honestly, I'm pretty glad that I did. I got a good experience out of it, and I think it definitely inspired me to try to bring in a lot of African culture, Black culture, into the designs that I choose to do, especially in the future.
And I was going to mention, with Tanaya saying that this is one of the opportunities that we got initially to first include like a social justice topic onto one of our studio projects. For me personally, prior to this, I've always tried to incorporate like Black culture into my designs. We had like a restaurant design one year, and I based that on like soul food, like me growing up, and just like Black culture in general. That was a big inspiration for me. But I talked to some of Asha's previous students prior to joining the studio, and they mentioned them working on the Magnolia House, and how Asha always usually focuses her projects on social justice. So I knew kind of prior to looking at that email, like Tanaya mentioned, that it was important for me as a Black woman, in particular as a designer, to do that social justice project. And that really just honestly changed my perspective, like as a designer. It was very like, I haven't felt that way yet in studio. Mm-hmm. Like it changed how I felt like walking into studio. Like I felt more included, I felt heard, I felt proud to be a Black designer. So yeah, represented as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, for me, I am also a minority, and I can definitely agree with Courtney. I feel like we haven't been able to do projects like this where we can actually, I guess, show our culture into something. And yes, we have done a restaurant, but I feel like this was a thing that you can actually have a conversation about. It was much deeper. It was topics that were really hard to talk about. So I feel like, yes, this project was definitely a really important one.
Well, for me, when I read the email and it said that it was going to focus on some sort of social justice and museum, I was immediately interested because I've always been interested in social justice, and I never thought that interior design could go into social justice. And doing the project was really interesting because I was almost combining the two things that I was really interested in. And I learned so much, and I learned so much about designing in a social justice aspect, and I'm really happy that I got to do this project.
I was coming off like a semester where we did a like retail project, and it just felt so unproductive. I was like, why am I designing this? It was solely for the sake of luxury, and it just felt excessive and almost like gross in a way of like it's just a waste. And so then like I was signed up for like I think it was another restaurant project, and then I got the email. I was like, oh, I can actually help someone with design. Like I hadn't even like considered that, and like that reminded me like the original reason why I even wanted to be an interior designer was to make people happy and like to somehow like create spaces where people felt safe and seen. And I was like, oh, this is like exactly what I want to do. And we hadn't gotten a project like this before. And I think that's exactly like what it ended up being. And Asha did such a good job of like bringing in like outside designers to talk to us and like talking about like diversity in design and just like how little there is. And then like I think Jack Travis talked about something that's really impactful, designing spaces where people see themselves reflected in. And that was a concept like I hadn't even thought of, and that was humbling to realize that I had never thought of, because I had never had to think of that. And that was just very eye-opening and extremely humbling. So yeah, it was a really great project.
Yeah, so when I first got the email, I think it was between, I can remember somebody was doing a school. So at first, that's the one I picked because I did want to learn how to build schools because I was thinking about building a school back in my village. But then I saw the other one. I was like, let me just choose this just in case. So I switched it up, and when we got more into the class, I was like, yeah, this is for me because some like when I go to black museums, it repeats the same history over and over again, and compared to Jewish museum, it just hit you different than black museums. But even though the slavery and everything were like more people have died compared to the Holocaust, and I'm not saying the Holocaust wasn't impactful, but nowadays it's just like, hey, a lot of people died during the slave trade and everything too. So I think that should be be a more uncomfortable space compared to what African museums are now. So I was like, so how can I use this to just make it uncomfortable so people can realize how this tragic thing that happened to black people was actually like the worst thing that ever happened. And even history professor says that the slave trade was the worst thing that ever happened to people, a specific type of group too. So I think that I just want more people to understand and to just learn that this is just more than just a museum. It's about history too, and the solution that we can solve for not ever repeating over and over again. So that's how I felt about the project.
It was really coming off an interesting summer too, like the Black Lives Matter movement, and then like with Trump no longer being president, like I think everything is just heightened. And then it was like now we had like this intentional space to have these really hard conversations that have been needing, like we need to have these conversations. Now it's like a whole entire semester of like, yeah, this is all we're gonna be doing, and it was great.
I think it's also important to also recognize that there were and is people that are still not open to having these conversations. And I think our section was pretty small, but I think it was important for all of us to have these conversations because we all come from different experiences. So I think it was nice to be able to share that with y'all in the section. I really enjoyed having that as a part of my experience here in IARc.
Really quickly, I also thought like the location of our site was pretty interesting as well. Like with A&T being right down the street, it was like basically in the middle of like where UNCG is, where A&T is, and I thought that was like pretty cool. Like the site itself, the like historical district that we were kind of into. I felt like if the site is gonna actually be a landmark for like after we leave to hold Eugene's story, I feel like that would be a really good location for people to visit and hear about, what happened.
It was centralized.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the community aspect was a really big thing that I focused on in my design specifically, and the idea of like Greensboro being lifted up through something like this, because the way it was presented to us, it was not only the museum, but it was also like the center for like a community center, and I really liked that aspect because I thought that the museum is important, learning the history is important, but you have to have both. You have to have the learning of the history, and then how are you going to bring people up? Like how are you going to get the community engaged? You can teach them about Eugene Harrison all you want, but what are they going to do with that information? And I think the community aspect was a really big part of that.
So the one question I have is like, what was the difficult part about this project?
Yeah.
For me, this really, really bothered me, y'all. For me, it was that moment where Deborah Barnes came and talked to us, and we were in 401. And for me, that was my first time meeting her, as I'm pretty sure it was for all of us. But I was like, ooh, she is really preaching. I'm like, yes, I'm taking notes. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, and for me, like, I don't really get to like hear from many black professors while I'm here at UNCG, which I was honored, and I respected her so much for coming like in there and talking to us. So to hear like my other peers on the opposite side of the wall, they have no idea what's going on. Like, that bothered me so bad, and it just made me feel like they need to be in this room just as much as like everyone else in this room needs to be. Like, we all need to be having a project where social justice in some kind of aspect is included, because not only are we changing certain aspects of our community outside of the project, but we're also changing our studio culture itself. You know what I mean? We're having people be represented in the very same projects that we're doing. You know what I mean? And that was really important for me, because for a long time, I didn't feel seen in studio. Like, I didn't feel represented in projects that we're doing. So I wanted so bad to just be like, hold on, stop real quick. Like, let me pull my peers in here, because they need to hear this. Like, they need to know how I've been feeling. Like, they just need exposure to this. Like, you know, so that really, really bothered me. I thought that was a great question. So.
Well, I think going off of that, like, one of the big things was our studio was really small compared to the rest of the other studios. And I was always a bit thrown off by that, because I was like, why isn't anyone else choosing to do this, to learn about it? And I think it was the option of choice, because people wanted to do other things. And it's not that they necessarily didn't want to learn about, you know, interior design and social justice and all of that, but we had the choice. And I think the idea of choice versus, like, I remember first year, we all had to do the same projects. And I think that was important, because there's some projects that, like this project, like, we shouldn't skip this. Exactly. You know, there are some projects that you can skip. Like, we all have all designed a restaurant, you know, like, we can do that. But there are some projects that are impactful like this, that, you know, you get all of this information, you get to learn from so many different people. And it was also the first project, I think, that we were able to learn from outside sources. You know, like Dr. Barnes came in, but it was also something that was, like, actually happening. And that almost never happens in studio. And I was super surprised that so little people chose to do that project, because I was like, I'm going to do this. I want to learn about this.
Or even, like, whenever, like, you're trying to explain it to other students of, like, so, like, what are you doing in studio? Like, on your elevator ride up, and it's like you're trying to, like, give them, like, this, like, super fast thing, and, like, the typical response was, "Ooh, that sounds too heavy."
Exactly.
Yeah.
I actually had that conversation with someone. Like, I'm not gonna say who it was, but they were like, "Oh, what city are you in?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm in Osha." She was like, "Oh, I heard about that project." I just didn't want to do anything too sad. Like, that was just too depressing for me. It was too sad, and I was like, "Are you like that's your reasoning for not choosing studio, because the topic is sad? Like, it's reality. Like, what do you mean?" Like, I wanted to say that so bad, but I was like, "Oh, okay." I know. I was like, "Yeah, okay." Oh my God, I was like, "Courtney, why didn't you get on her?"
I think it's also the idea of,
there's
like,
still time.
it's the idea of, like, challenging yourself. And, like, yeah, it's a hard topic, but how else are you going to learn? You know, you have to challenge yourself, and you have to put yourself in those uncomfortable situations. And that's what makes a good project, if you're uncomfortable. And I think that also emanated in a lot of our designs, the idea of being uncomfortable and, like, discomfort within the situation. I was so surprised. Every time I had to explain it to someone, I'd be like, okay, so.
And I mean, it's even that way now.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's just a little bit different, because when people told me that they felt like the topic was heavy, it made me question it a little bit. Is it not supposed to be heavy for me because of what? Like, I think that the way when people describe it as being heavy, it's kind of, I don't want to say a cop-out, but that's kind of how I feel. Because just because someone is of a minority group or not doesn't mean that the subject is going to be any less heavier or weaker for them. Like, seeing and reliving it and just thinking about it as a Black person, you're like, oh, like, my people really had to go through that, and it was really unnecessary, especially because when we talk about Eugene and his instances, like, it's more so hearsay. Like, some people didn't even know if it really happened or if it didn't happen. It was just from word of mouth. And it too, like, just because even if it did happen, how far is too far in these scenarios? And I think that's important for people to realize. And I think that's why some people today are constantly blinded or think that everything is just rainbows and sunshine, because a lot of people refuse to acknowledge the past because it's too tough, it's too heavy. So in my opinion, just saying things like that is honestly just a cop-out.
From what I took from it, because it's like all the projects that we did, my aspect, it wasn't meaningful. I'm not saying there wasn't something there to learn from, but it wasn't touching it. So when I was surprised when we first started the class, I was like, when I first signed up, I was expecting like a lot of people,
Mhm.
like, you know.
Yeah.
And then it was just like, what was it, 13? Less
Yeah, I
than
think
13? Yeah.
There weren't more
So,
than 15 of us.
Yeah. So the thing is, like, I think that most people need to realize, like, we could say, like, in this field, we could say it's more majority white than you actually see black designers. But at the same time, there will be at some point in somebody field, in this field, that you're going to be working with somebody that's outside of your culture.
Yeah.
So I feel like if you don't at least take classes to engage with somebody else in culture, how can you actually do that in a real life work
Yeah.
field? Because not everybody's different. So you might work with an Asian person, they like it this type of style, but you don't know how to interact with that culture because you never experienced learning like how to interact with different cultures. So I think like in the future, I think like we should have one class or one studio that we design in a different culture instead of
Yeah.
repeating the same thing like restaurants and other type of things. That's where we need to be more broad than just staying in one place.
I mean, even if you have the choice of like choosing studio, like one semester, it could just be like learning about different cultures and like one, Japan. You know what I mean? Like you just like pick something and you kind of like delve deep into that because like you said, like you don't know who you're going to work with in the future, and everyone has different perspectives in life, and it's important to learn those perspectives in life. And even if you're not going into like museum designing, it's still important to have that background of like, how do I, make sure this is meaningful, even if it's like a house, because you could be working with someone like your clients also, who knows what their culture is. So it's just like having those meaningful conversations, and I think it's important for. I think we should probably have a studio that does that, rather than restaurants and retail stores and apartments, because that's important, but it's not.
Yeah, and I mean,
hard.
it's the foundation, but
Yeah.
where are we going beyond?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because we designed a museum, what, freshman, sophomore year?
Yeah.
We did a project like that, but forgot what it's about. Like, you
Oh,
know what I mean?
right,
I
yeah.
swear. And that just shows, like, I forgot what it was about. Like, I'm not going to forget this project.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, we designed museums for restaurants, but let's go beyond.
Yeah.
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 Like
What's
how-
the story here?
How can we make an impact with our designs versus just, all right, I'm gonna put some throw pillows on this
Because
chair.
even with what Saad's saying, like even with him having like the school, okay, what's the story there? Like,
Yeah.
are you designing a school in your village? Like you said, that could be a project itself, like that
Yeah.
everyone is participating in studio.
Yeah.
It goes beyond just okay, here's a school, here's a site, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Or even like a school that like, for kids with disabilities, because that's like a
Exactly,
complete,
yeah.
like they have schools for deaf kids and blind kids, and that is a completely different, learning process of designing that school, because you have to immerse yourself in that culture.
Yeah.
And that group, and I think it's important to learn to immerse yourself in that group.
So now I remember where those, I guess the questions that Asha asked us today about the video that we're doing earlier. I remember it was her evaluation thing that we do at the end of the semester. And I remember that will be the only time I truly like said something about the class.
Yeah.
Because everybody else is like, I can just say, yeah, you were a great professor. Yeah, we learned the same things over and over. But I will say that I literally ranted in that description, and I was like, I feel like this has to be like a requirement for IARc, because like everybody was saying, like we all have different cultures, we all come from different backgrounds, and for us to learn that almost while we're about to graduate, like I feel like this has to be required before even designing, you know.
Even if it's not a studio, like a core IR class instead. We have all of the like AutoCAD classes, like sustainability. We could have a sustainability class, but what about like designing for other cultures? Designing for, learning how to design in other cultures. All of that, because I think that's extremely important, especially when you're going into a field that is so broad.
Yeah. I think it's also important to note that since we're technically considered the designers of the future, how many like generic brick buildings and stuff can we constantly
Yeah.
see? And I think when you decide to incorporate culture or somebody's religion or something into a design, it makes it more impactful, but then it makes it more creative and it stands out more in society. Like when you walk around this campus, like yes, there's historical context here to these buildings, for example, but most of them look the same.
Yeah.
But if you was to add in Hispanic culture or African culture or Black culture, then the color, the shapes, the
Yeah, yeah.
textures, it could be something that's more intriguing to people rather than something that somebody's like, oh, I see that every day.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't want to bring up any names, but I do.
I'm not doing it.
My first semester of third year, we did have that restaurant, and that was the first time I was like, oh my gosh, like let me put some of my background into a project, but not as much as Eugene's. It's kind of different. And so I was like, my background is Mexican, and that's where my family's from, and I remember I was like, okay, let me incorporate some things from there into this restaurant. And at the end of the year, someone specifically told me, this does not give me Mexican vibes. This does not show me any of your background. The colors are off. The textures are off. And I was like, you're telling me that it's wrong, but I'm trying to tell you that this is, sure, it's not like Aztec or anything. It's not the regular, colorful Mexican type of thing. But I'm showing you, like, the historical side of Mexico. I'm showing you these textures that are coming from the pyramids or anything, stuff like that. So, yeah. I will say, like, that just really bothered me.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine somebody tells you that about your Eugene project. Like, oh, it doesn't give me African-American vibes. Or it doesn't, like, wow, why would you say that? Like, I don't know.
I think that touches a lot to home personally because, again, we've done a lot of projects here in studio, and if it wasn't for, like, your restaurant or even Courtney's, I can honestly say I personally never sat here and thought, oh, maybe I should incorporate Black culture into that because when you're really thinking as a designer in perspective, you're like, what sells? What is going to look good on this application or in this portfolio or on this resume? So I never really thought about that. And so when we did this Eugene project, I think I spent a lot more time on conceptual work than I have ever done, a lot more on research and finding textures and patterns and colors that I honestly think would work in this space that is a significant part of Black culture all around. And before that, in most of my designs, I can honestly say that they was probably basic and simple, but I don't know, like I just think that it's hard in the design field to be willing to open yourself and share your culture and where you come from because again, everybody may be like it doesn't sell, everybody may not take it in the right way. So it's like as a designer, when do you know that it's the right time to incorporate yourself into the design, even though your customer might want something a little different?
Yeah. It's vulnerable. Yeah.
I think that's like one of my favorite parts about design is like the potential to tell a story, and like let's say like you're working with a client and they're like designing like their kitchen. They have specific memories from their like life of like moments in kitchens, and they like want to recreate those moments. So you get to like help them figure out how to tell these stories. So like with your like restaurant project, like you have like memories of like this is what represents my culture like to me specifically. Let me share this little bit of story with you. And so it's like the better that we can get to like I guess the better we learn to hear people's stories through their designs and like just humble enough to be like, oh, I want to hear your story, not like, oh, let me just project my version of the story onto your design. Like, let me intentionally hear like what you have to say, and then like as with a client, like, okay, let me hear what you want your story to look like or sound like, and how can I tell your story? It's like gonna be really important moving forward.
I'm gonna say I wish we had more like quote unquote clients within our studio because we didn't learn that. All of our projects were kind of based around what we preferred. And like we had, I think like the apartments we did, like second year, whatever. Like we had like clients, but we made those up, you know? So it was like we got to choose whatever we wanted and it didn't really matter. And I think with something like this, with Eugene's, like we had a client, we had, like, which you know, was the community of Greensboro, but, you know, you have to listen to the client, and you are not going to be able to learn how to listen to the client and understand, you know, what they want out of the design if we're not taught that. If we're just taught design how you know, for your style. Like, everyone has a style, and I'm sure clients will come to you because you have a specific style, but you still have to listen to them. You still have to be like, okay, I'm going to tone back this part of my style because you want this, you know? I think that is another thing that we can improve in our program, just the idea of, like, learning how to listen to clients and not just doing your own thing.
Or pretending to have a client, but you're actually being your own client. Yeah.
Because, like, we have to learn how to design for ourselves, too. And, like, you know, I understand why, because, you know, we have to learn just, like, the fundamentals of design. And, like, designing an apartment is just, like, a basic thing. But how else are we, like, how are we going to go into the real world, into the field, if we don't know how to listen to people and implement what they want?
Other question would be, what was the best design that you created in this project, and what does it mean to you?
Best or favorite?
Favorite, best, it could be. I'll start. I'll probably say my favorite one. Everybody might think it's the tree, but it's not. It's not. It's the statues. Because I feel like at first, before we modeled it, it was just a wall with people naming North Carolina that got lynched. But after when I added the statues, it just gave more impactful meaning. Because in Dr. Bourne's lecture, she told us it wasn't just black folks that got lynched. It was white, Native, Latinos, anybody that was lynched. And I understood because that was probably the punishment during that time period. And the people took that personally. It's not like nowadays where somebody killed your family, you could just go kill them. You can get punished too, but back then it was just like, hey, the people can do what they want to do. So when I made that statue, compared to where you would see a white statue versus a black statue, the white statue is perfectly fine, intact. Compared to a black statue, for male and female, their body parts are ripped. Their legs are torn off because they would take prizes from a black person to take home with them. So I think that's why it was my favorite. And then the mirrors too, where it's supposed to represent how the feeling was to get lynched and how the hands are trying to grab you or pointing at you. So that's why I really liked it, because that's how I want people to feel. Even though as black folks we could talk about, oh, this person got lynched and everything, talking about it and feeling it are two different things. So imagine if you felt it. So how would that really feel? And I mean, you'll get closer to it, like, hey, yo, like this was on a whole different level compared to we just talking about it. But if you actually experienced it, it'll be a whole different turnaround looking at somebody else.
Yeah. And I think as people, we can't even fathom how that feels. Like, even with us being black, like, I cannot physically fathom how that feels. But, like the mirror with the hands reaching out of you, like, it, like, I don't want to say that it wouldn't be close enough, but it's like as close as you're gonna get. You know what I mean? Like,
I think the sound effects too.
Yes, I've been
into that space to feel that. And I think that was really interesting with this project, was we were able to kind of create those spaces of, like, you know, like Sab was saying, like, every African American museum, it's a learning experience, but, like, how do you feel? You know, how do these people feel? And I think when we listen to those stories of the people who whose family members had been lynched, and that was the big thing that really spoke to me, because we learned how they felt, and I was like, how are we going to take how they felt and put that into a design? And that's where the idea of powerless came from. And the other part of my design specifically that I really liked was my second exhibit, which is the story, I call it the story of Eugene Hairston. And I wanted it to feel like you were this kid. You know, I had these interactive scenes scenes or like sets where you can walk in and you can feel like you're in his house. And a lot of it is speculation. We don't know exactly what his house looked like or what his life was like, but I wanted to make people, you know, put you in the shoes of like, this is a 17-year-old black boy in 1887. You know, he went to work at a tobacco mill, and this was the one-room house that he stayed in. And then moving up through the exhibit, the next exhibit you get into is his lynching story. And I wanted to create that impactfulness of like, you learn who this kid was, you are this kid now, and then you have to go up and be like, oh my God. You know, you're bombarded with all of this. Like, the wall in the exhibit has like an image presented of a like mob lynching someone. You know, like you're presented with this just like horrible feeling. And I think that was really important in this design, and really something that I really enjoyed was the idea of making people uncomfortable and how you make people uncomfortable while still getting them to learn and understand and like, I don't know, perceive the atrocities that happen.
I will say that my favorite thing was my restaurant / stage, because we got that inspiration from a place in Washington, D.C., so it's already existing, but I don't know, like, putting that into my museum, it's brought in the community together, and, you know, there's just so many things that you can do there, and there's also food. Who doesn't love food? So,
Amen.
yeah, so I feel like that was like a big thing for my museum that I could incorporate.
I had a maze on my second floor, and I think that was like the first time I designed. I was like, I like it, and
That was super cool.
yeah, I enjoyed that part, and just like the idea came from a Holocaust museum in Germany, and he had taken coordinates and connected the coordinates, and it made the shape of his building. So then I took like a map of North Carolina, and it had like all the recorded lynchings, and like color coded by date, and then like connected the dots and like overlaid them, and like it made this maze. And so not only is like creating like this certain feeling, but like giving people opportunities for empathy. So it's like just like what you guys are saying of like how you feel sticks with you a lot longer than something you just read, because you can forget what you read all the time. Like I do it before every test.
Yeah.
But I don't forget how I feel during the test, and I don't forget how I felt like while I was trying to like learn something, or like and so like creating these feelings for people of like vulnerability and chaos and not knowing like what the next step is, and again like taking less emphasis on like images, because we can almost like glorify violence, which is like so twisted and wicked, and we can forget, like I think Dr. Barnes was saying, like the whole point of like racism taking the view off of the perpetrator and just focusing solely on the violent act. And so now, like, okay, I feel this way. Who did this to me? Who was it?
Right.
And then figuring out, okay, what am I going to do about it? I don't want to feel this way ever again. So, yeah, I think that's probably my favorite part of my museum.
My favorite part of my museum would probably be the second floor lobby space. So as you come onto the second floor and you exit, let's say off the elevator, you're able to enter the lobby space on the second floor, which really has nothing on that floor but a big walk-in path where Eugene's plaque is displayed. It's windows all on each side, and it's an enclosed kind of like bridge that people will walk around full like 360, and then it leads up to this very narrow bridge, only enough space for one person, and Eugene's plaque is displayed right there. Now once you come off the bridge, basically on like the left hand side, there's a image that was painted by a black artist, and it's entitled Face Reality, which I thought fit the setting of the narrative that we're trying to construct here, which is that we need to face and conquer the fact that lynchings happened, because again, a lot of people try to forget history, and that for me personally, I felt like this was a space that was like Eugene's like final resting space, kind of, so to speak, especially in some really good lighting. Like you'll have like the tree branches above you as you walk across it. So it's pretty nice. So that's probably my favorite part. I think that the impact it plays with it just being just the plaque and then the tree behind it in such a big open space, I think says a lot more than having like a lot of artwork in the surrounding walls. So that's personally my favorite part of my exhibit would be that space.
You got a favorite?
I have a couple favorite spaces, but for different reasons. I just remember Dr. Barnes saying like how are we gonna get people here? Because some people are just gonna choose to not come. Like, you know what I mean? So I just kept asking myself and like writing that question down, like how do you get people here when they choose not to come? So it was important for me, like especially because we're in like Guilford County or Greensboro, knowing that like it's a college town, like there's a lot of college kids, there are a lot of people who have like small businesses that need like networking opportunities to meet different people, or like they're artists, they're creatives, or things like that. It was important for me to design like with the intent to help them in a way. So I would say one of my favorite parts is my artist like creative suite, where artists are able to rent out their own like studios to create and things like that. And then I had like these cool mirrors there that had like a sign on it or something like that that said future investor, future entrepreneur, future architect, and stuff like that. Just like a aesthetic way for people to like come to the museum, because I know like I'm thinking like myself and like people my age, like I'm like, you know, I'm looking on Google Maps like what should we do today, like something free, like I'm gonna go to a place that's cute where I can take pictures or something. Like I know a lot of people think that way, so with that space in particular, that's what I was thinking. And then secondly, I will also say where I also showcase Eugene's plaque itself, because when you do start off on that first floor and you get to the area that the floor is cut out and you can look down and see his plaque, you have no idea what it is. Like until you go downstairs, you go through that whole journey, you hear about his story and you see the plaque, you see his name, and you figure out who it is. So I would say that's another cool space that I liked.
The one thing that you mentioned was when you said Dr. Boomer's, when she said how can we get people there, and that reminded me of why my building was black. Because think about it, if you're driving somewhere and you see this building that's just all black, you're gonna be like, you might not come right away, but you're gonna schedule a day where you're going like, let me go see what's happening in that building.
Right.
Yeah, so I think like for us, I don't know what everybody's gonna go into in the future, because I'm thinking more architectural. I think that for us, if we're gonna bring more people into a topic that have a choice to, I think that architectural design need to be where it should ask a person, be like, what's this? Let me come back, or let me go there right now, because it's out of place. Because when we look at downtown Greensboro, there's brick walls, brick building, and stuff like that. And then you see this one big building that's just all black, you're gonna forget about the other buildings and just come to that one, because it's unique. It's something that you won't see every day. So I think like that's the one way that we can start bringing it into people, into a space where they can choose or choose to come and go.
Yeah, I mean, that was also one of my biggest inspirations too. Like, how do we get people in here? And one of my biggest inspirations was actually Red Cinemas on Battleground, because every time I drive past it, you see the murals, and they change, you know. But I think the big one that you see is the Dream with Stan Lee. And I remember the first time I was driving down Battleground, and I was like, that is a cool theater, I want to go there. And so that's what I kind of took my inspiration from. And the exterior of my museum has two spaces, one from when you're driving south, and then north on North Church Street, and they're murals. And I wanted them to be able to be switched out, to have it be like a living building, and they switch out, and they're done by local artists. And just the idea of like capturing people's attention, and how do we draw people into this, you know? And that was also a really big thing. Like, how do you, because it's just like this little corner, you know, and it's like a main area, but it's this little corner, and like, how do you get people into that building? And yeah, that's why I went with the murals, because I was like, I remember the first time I saw those murals, and you know, it also begs the question, like, what's in here? You know, if I see this art, you know, what am I going to see inside the building if I know it's a museum?
a 30% discount because I work at the store.
It's really funny. So I think this is how we're gonna end it. I think everybody gave their own opinion about what they thought about the projects and how we could further this more. I'm gonna let everybody say their names, their clarification, whatever else they want to say, and then we'll just end it. Yeah, my name is Saad. It was a pleasure doing this project. It was really interesting, and I don't think I will ever forget this project because it brought my design creativity back because I was lacking for the first 2 years. But I think like this project actually brought the reason why I actually want to start design. So yeah.
My name is Ruth, and yeah, I'm with you. I think it reminded me why I love design and why I wanted to do this in the first place. And it humbled me to the dirt in the best possible way. And yeah, I'm never going to forget this.
My name is Renee, and along the same lines, like, I was impacted so much by this project, and it made me realize how much more I can do with interior design than I ever thought was possible. And now that's what I want to do. Like, I want to, impact people with design, and I'm really glad that I got to do this project because it really helped me understand the full reason why I wanted to do interior design, not just for the pretty colors, but because I know, it can impact people and how you feel when you walk into a space.
My name is Nyla Bautista. I definitely agree with the three of you. I will not regret doing this project at all. I feel like it's something that I really needed in these past 4 years because without it, I'd probably still be clueless. I probably am lacking all that information that we had that third year. So, yeah.
Okay, my name is Courtney, and obviously I agree with all you guys. But yeah, I'm also never going to forget this project. For me, it changed how I feel now walking in the studio. Like I mentioned, I think a little bit, like not that I didn't feel the best walking in the studio, but I just feel more invited, more represented, more connected to like my peers and things like that. I didn't really feel like I had many friends or like I didn't really know too many people. I always stayed to myself. So like now, like I feel heard. I feel like I have more like friends and like yeah, which is so cheesy, but it's like really it's like really true. So yeah.
My name is Tanaya, and quite frankly, this is probably by far the best project I've done since I've been in IARc. I can honestly say it has brought back a lot of motivation that I felt like I was losing down the line. I was really prepared to switch majors. I'm telling you, I was prepared. And then it also allowed us to be able to make new connections and meet different artists and just all around different people within the field that can offer a brand new perspective than the one that we originally had. I don't know. I just enjoyed it. That's all honestly, all I can really say is that I really just enjoyed the project.
I just want to do a little shout out to Asha too.
I
do.
do.
Like, this was a bold move. Like, as a teacher, you have no idea how the students are going to respond. Like, because she had no idea. We could have showed up and like, yeah, this is really, I don't want to do this. Like, this is a heavy topic, and she just like, there were no eggshells. Like, she just walked in. It was like, yeah, this is the truth. This is like, we're gonna look at it.
Like Asha not black.
Yeah.
But she, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Look at what she did.
Oh,
like
yeah.
that just shows you, like,
Oh yeah.
you know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah.
I think she
that
also
might have been
forced
pointless
us
to say
to
that,
have-
but yeah.
I think she also forced us to have to dive a little bit deeper. Like every single time I met with her, I'm telling you, and I was changing my design
I know.
ideas.
Right,
Like
yeah,
she's
yeah.
like, okay, well, what's the meaning behind this? And what's the meaning behind
Yeah.
questions that I never had asked before? Because now, usually when I did projects, they would just be like, okay, I can see you're working, I can see you're making
Yeah.
progress. But for her, like every single thing needed to be
Why?
intentional. You
Why?
need to have a
Yeah.
reason. So I think that definitely changed my perspective on being a designer, especially because she made sure that we was well informed and that we knew what we was talking about before we did it. That it wasn't just, and also too that everything that we decided to put in our exhibits, because everybody puts something different for their extra exhibits, that it wasn't something that you can always see at every other museum.
Yeah.
The design wasn't the same, the layout wasn't the same, the exhibits itself wasn't the same. So I think she did a pretty good job.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And mean, like,
Take a bullet in her.
like other professors I've had have like given me suggestions on things to do. Asha asked questions, which, like you were saying, it was. I think it really impacted the design because it made me think about, why am I putting this in the exhibit? What do I want people to feel when I'm designing this, when they walk into this space? And instead of just like suggestions of, oh, maybe, you know, you could do this over here, it was, you know, well, how do you want people to feel?
Yeah.
You know, all of that. And I think was super great. And I love that about about that studio. I really learned a lot about, you know, myself and the design process in general.
Because I think we could all say throughout when we all first started, it was about you gotta make the client or the visitor feel comfortable until we got to Asha class where she said it don't have to be comfortable.
Yeah.
And then that's when I took it a step ahead. I'd be like, bet.
Yeah.
Say less.
Yeah.
Say less. But other than that, this project has been a new experience, I think, to everybody in here. And I think we're going to end it. Shout out to class of 2023.
We did it!
But yeah, it was an honor, and thank you.
Signing off.
Yeah.
Signing off.
Thank you.